Racketeering, theft, and bootlegging were the way of life for many men during the 1920s and 1930s. This was the time of Prohibition, when crime thrived, and gangsters like Dutch Schultz rose to power. Imagine a time when the streets of New York were ruled by shadowy figures and illegal booze flowed like a secret river. Known for his ruthless tactics and fierce ambition, he built an empire out of bootlegging, bullying, and violence. His dramatic rise and fall make him one of the most infamous gangsters of the Prohibition era. Are you interested to find out more about this New York gangster? Then this is your video. Watch till the end to know the thrilling and dramatic story of Dutch Schultz. Arthur Simon Flagenheimer, better known as Dutch Schultz, was the nightmare of many. He was not born with a silver spoon, but he made a name for himself, a name that no one will ever forget. Schultz got into the world of crime at a very young age. By his teens, he was already in prison. This was where he got the nickname Dutch from a fellow inmate. At least some of us know how the 20s were. It was the time of Prohibition, a time of crime and violence. The 20s were all about jazz bands, speakeasies, and crime. Among all this chaos and distractions, a shadowy figure emerged from the underworld. Yes, you guessed it right. It's Dutch Schultz, and he was about to change the way things work. Anyone who was ready to get their hands dirty and was not scared of consequences really enjoyed the Prohibition era. Although many gangsters rose to fame during this period, Dutch Schultz was the king of the jungle. To understand the story of Dutch Schultz, we must first know his past. So let's dive into the shadowy past of Dutch Schultz. Schultz was a self-made man who had humble beginnings, and this kid from the Bronx went on to become one of America's most notorious gangsters. He first started off as a petty thief and had already found his way into prison by his teens. After his release, he got into the bootlegging scene. Now, bootlegging was a very good business during those days because people were dying to have a beer or a drink, and this was the perfect opportunity. Schultz first began working as a bouncer at the Hub Social Club, a speakeasy in Bronx, New York, which was owned by the notorious Joey No. He was the first person who identified Schultz's potential and groomed him. Ironically, this very act would turn out to be one of the things he regretted the most in his life. Impressed with Schultz's ruthlessness and temper, Noe made Schultz a partner, and this Neo-Schultz partnership was dangerous. So dangerous that within no time, the two started controlling every single bootlegging activity in the Bronx. The timing was in their favor, as alcohol was declared illegal around this same time. For obvious reasons, the demand for bootleg liquor soared, a perfect storm for criminals like Schultz to exploit. However, Schultz, being an ambitious man, did not want to become a small-time dealer. Crime ran rich in his blood. He aimed to control the entire bootlegging industry in New York. His eye was always on the golden apple, and partnering up with other known bootleggers like Waxy Gordon made him a fortune. Soon the duo was a well-known name in the Bronx. The Neo-Schultz organization started to flourish. They started expanding their operations to other parts of New York. But what is a crime thriller without a gang war and a villain? Enter the Irish mob, led by Jack Legs Diamond, who were not happy with the success of Schultz and Neo, and the rest, as they say, was history. This war saw the deaths of Joey Noe and Jack Diamond. Noe was shot dead by Diamond's gang, and Jack Diamond was gunned down by the police. Following this, Schultz ruled over the bootlegging trade from the 1920s to the 1930s. Now, unlike other gangsters who relied on brute force, Schultz was known for his strategic mind and tactics, and this blend of brains and brawn made him formidable. Known for his violent methods, he was nicknamed the Bronx Bully. Schultz was able to command both fear and respect. His whole criminal organization was built on intimidation and fear. But like any good mobster, he understood the importance of maintaining influential contacts. Besides bootlegging, Schultz also did racketeering. Let's just say Dutch might be a natural-born criminal. He began extorting New York restaurant owners and workers. He extorted money by forcing restaurant owners to join the Metropolitan Restaurant and Cafeteria Owners Association, an association that Schultz had founded, and extorted them of thousands of dollars. In Dutch Schultz's world, saying no came with deadly consequences. His paranoia drove him to kill anyone he suspected might testify against him, even if that meant turning on his own associates. His ruthlessness knew no bounds. He was infamous for his brutal approach to business, marked by violent clashes and relentless aggression. For Schultz, though, this was just another day in the dangerous life of a gangster, where loyalty came first and fear ruled supreme. He also had his hand in illegal gambling, aka numbers racket. Although gambling was illegal, the people loved the game because it was easy to win prizes. Like any other game, this was manipulated too, but the people were too blind to see that. When he came to know that this business was very profitable, he started to expand. He took control of a substantial portion of this illegal lottery operation in New York, particularly in the Harlem and the Bronx areas. Schultz's influence extended beyond the criminal underworld. With police, judges, and politicians in his pocket, he wielded significant power. Greasing the palms of officials made it easier for him to run his organization and avoid legal troubles. I think we all have a basic understanding of how gangs operate, thanks in part to iconic films like The Godfather and Goodfellas, which have given us an insight into these organizations. Audiences with their portrayal of organized crime. Schultz was no ordinary man. He was very cunning and a resourceful person. Like every gangster, Schultz's organization clashed with other mobsters from time to time. These conflicts were not just battles for territory. They were battles for survival, and gangs take survival of the fittest very seriously. All these criminal activities made Schultz a very rich man. With an estimated worth of nearly $7 million at the time of his death. As his wealth grew, so did his confidence, but it expanded to the point where it nearly led him to the brink of death. He once made a public statement claiming that he was untouchable, and made bizarre statements about being immune to the law, which was a sign of his overconfidence. We know how things are going to end for a person who is not careful while he is engaged in criminal activities. But things were about to change quickly for him. When the Prohibition ended in 1933, bootlegging activities were no longer profitable, but his illegal rackets brought in huge amounts of cash. But the problem was, these incomes were not taxed, and this caught the attention of the IRS. The IRS is not something a gangster wants on his back. His rise to power would, however, see him draw the attention of a special prosecutor, Thomas Dewey. Thomas Dewey was a rising star in law enforcement, and he was determined to bring down Schultz and his whole organization. His first move was convicting Schultz for failing to pay federal taxes. This conviction led to the infamous Schultz trials for tax evasions. In 1935, Schultz was tried twice for income tax evasion. The first trial ended when the jury couldn't reach a verdict. Naturally, this gave rise to rumors about the jury being bribed by Schultz, a rumor that is more likely to be right than wrong. Well, it's not something that is completely false. In his second trial in 1935, he was acquitted of tax evasion. This trial was named the unfriendly trial due to the constant threats and violence surrounding it, but the judge's verdict angered the mayor, who then issued an order for Schultz to be arrested on sight if he returned to New York. Now this was a breaking point for him. Schultz was forced to relocate his operations to Newark, New Jersey, but Schultz was too stubborn to give up. Schultz had a lawyer who was known for his unorthodox ways. He made headlines by arguing that Schultz was mentally incompetent in order to avoid a long prison sentence. This tactic ultimately failed. From all this, we can understand that the story of Dutch Schultz was about to end. As Dutch Schultz's reign of terror drew to a close, his influence decreased. He no longer had the cops in his pocket, and even the members of his own organization were turning against him. From a petty thief to a mob boss, Schultz was more than just a man. Even though in the mid-1930s Schultz was one of New York's most notorious gangsters, ruling over illegal rackets and bootlegging with ruthlessness, he had many enemies, enemies that were more powerful than him. His ambition to rule over bootlegging and numbers rackets made him enemies both in and out of the criminal underworld. His downfall began when he started targeting other crime figures who were considered less of a threat. His ambitions led to a series of bloody wars and confrontations, notably with the powerful Luciano family. Let's say this was something that Dutch would later regret. The Luciano family was one of the most powerful mob families in the USA. This family was headed by Charles "Lucky" Luciano. Now, Luciano was no petty thief. He was a key figure in the criminal underworld. This beef with Luciano played a significant role in his downfall. Everything that goes up eventually comes down. And for Dutch Schultz, 1935 was the year his downfall began. He faced trials for tax evasion and other issues, and internal conflicts within his organization only made him more weak. To make matters worse, Schultz was the target of a failed assassination attempt by a rival gang, which led to his own eventual downfall. In a way, the man is right, but delivering good booze was not the only thing he did, and those things landed him in trouble. To understand Schultz's downfall, we must know about the Commission. The Commission was an association of Jewish gangsters who worked alongside Schultz's organization and allowed them to participate in some meetings. And let's say Schultz's relationship with the Commission was sour. All these internal tensions made Schultz vulnerable to betrayal and violence, and that is not the spot you want to be in when you are a gangster who has a number of enemies. One of Schultz's most infamous acts of defiance was him ordering the death of 2 government officials. This was a major breach in protocol, and this was what put him under intense scrutiny from the law. Schultz shocked the criminal underworld when he reportedly ordered a hit on the governor of New York. He planned to make these hits so that he could escape the federal charges against him. His audacity got him killed. The big shift came when Schultz was targeted by a high-profile hit squad sent by his enemies. In 1935, while he was out enjoying dinner at the Palace Chop House, a place he often visited and thought was safe, little did he know it would turn out to be his last meal. On the evening of October 23, 1935, Dutch Schultz was dining with his associates when a group of armed men stormed the restaurant. The gunmen opened fire, and Schultz and his men were caught in the crossfire, getting severely injured. Although Schultz survived the assassination attempt on him, he succumbed to his deadly injuries on October 24, 1935. It turns out the hit on Schultz was ordered by the Commission after Schultz disobeyed them and made an attempt to kill Prosecutor Dewey. Some of Schultz's last words were, "A boy has never wept, nor dashed 1,000 kin." This suggests that Schultz believed he had never shown weakness or vulnerability, even as a child. It reflects his self-image as a hardened, emotionless figure who did not let emotions affect him. These words can be seen as a declaration of his identity and legacy. Dutch Schultz amassed a fortune during his reign. Legend has it he wasn't one to trust banks. Stories persist of him burying millions of dollars in cash and valuables throughout the Northeast. Treasure hunters have spent decades searching for these hidden caches. Even though from all these stories we have come to the conclusion that Dutch Schultz was not a normal man, one of his strangest moments was on his deathbed when he reportedly requested for a glass of milk, but unfortunately he didn't get it. Dutch Schultz's life and crimes have been the subject of various books, documentaries, and films, reflecting his lasting impact on the criminal underworld and popular culture. His story is often regarded as a classic example of the violent and turbulent nature of organized crime during the early 20th century. Cotton Club 1984 by Francis Ford Coppola and The Dutch Schultz Story 1975 by Paul Wenkos are 2 movies that depict the life of this infamous criminal. This also ended an era of intense power struggles between crime organizations in the history of organized crime in America, and Schultz's story remains one of the chilliest and captivating in American crime history. He symbolized the brutality of Prohibition-era gangsters. And that wraps up our journey through the interesting yet violent life of Arthur Simon Flegenheimer, aka Dutch Schultz. Whether it be the racketeering or bootlegging stories, it's clear that these incidents have left a mark on everyone involved. But before you go, let us know in the comments which incident shocked you the most. Is there anything we missed out that you would like us to cover? We love hearing from you. For more such videos, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon. And if you enjoyed this video, you might not want to miss out on the story of Dillinger, who faced a similar fate, but in a completely different way.